So our first speaker today, Michael Eason. He's the Associate Director of Conservation and Collections at San Antonio Botanical Garden, San Antonio. As a conservation botanist and voice for native plants, Michael has devoted his career to the conservation of native plants and habitats in Texas and beyond. Just over a decade, he managed projects such as the Millennium Seed Bank Project, Floristic Survey of Big Bend National Park, Ferns of Transpacus, and a review of the aquatic invasives of Texas while working for the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. He currently heads the rare plant conservation programs at San Antonio Botanical Garden, where he has been the past 5 years. And he also has a consulting business, Texas Flora. And there goes my good reading light right there. There we go. He designs and installs native plant gardens and performs a variety of plant surveys on both public and private lands, including rare plant surveys, plant inventories, wetland delineation, and ecological assessments. In 2018, he published the field guide, Wildflowers of Texas. A copy is over there in the silent auction, and is currently working on several other books, including Wildflowers and Other Plants of Western Texas, a field guide, Naturalized and Native Species of Texas, and Native and Naturalized Vivaceae of Texas. He's served on the executive board of the Native Plant Society of Texas, 2017 to 21, currently the state botanist for the organization. He's co-president of the Big Bend chapter. So please welcome Michael Eason.
Well, it's good, one, to be here. I don't necessarily live in Alpine full-time anymore. As you heard, I'm in San Antonio Botanic Garden, so most of my time is spent in San Antonio these days, although I do still come out here and do some field work. And a slight big announcement, I think one person back there, Patty Manny, might like to hear this, but we collected seed of Styrax yogii yesterday. It was a pain in the butt, but we made it. Had to hike quite a ways. So again, thanks for coming out, and feel free to find me later, ask questions. I think we're going to be on a timeline here, so let's just get started and see if all this works. No. There we go. So if you're not familiar with West Texas, generally people call it the Chihuahuan Desert. We actually have 2 ecoregions out here, about 2,500 taxa, which is out of the 5.8 thousand, the 5,800 we have in Texas. We actually have the most diverse area out here. In all of Texas, we've got about 12 ecoregions. Out here, the Chihuahuan Desert's the largest. We also have the Arizona Mountains, Arizona, New Mexico Mountains, which is basically Guadalupe Mountains National Park. I like to always ask this when we get into these. Does anybody know what the indicator species is for the Chihuahuan Desert? Yes, good. Most people think that it's Ocotillo, and some people would also maybe say creosote. So especially if you're coming in from East Texas and you're heading west, you begin to see the Lechuguilla, the Ocotillo, and the creosote all about the same time. So a little interesting little thing that y'all might see if you're out and about. This is one of the new flushes of Ocotillo. If you ever wonder where those spines come from, it's actually leaves or the petioles. So, and one of our host plants, or it is a host plant for the Coletta silk moth. So you might actually see some of those around as you're out walking around some of the places out here. So where does that diversity come from? We have, like I said, 2,500 species out here. It is the Chihuahuan Desert. We don't have a whole lot of rain. So a lot of that just comes from one, being a large expansive area, but also the changes in elevation. So if you're down by, let's say, Del Rio, it's about 1,000-foot elevation. The high point, which is in the Guadalupe, is 8,700 feet. We sort of have everything in between. Lots of different geology. The soil types are varied, and of course, precipitation varies throughout the area. I think up until just a few months ago, we had maybe a few inches of rain, 3 to 5. And within the past couple of months, I think Alpine is now over 12 inches for the year. So we had all of that within about 6 weeks to 2 months. Here's a map showing some of the different elevations. You notice down here, that's Del Rio. So hopefully y'all probably know this area of Texas. That's 1,000-foot elevation. If you follow the river up, it gradually gets up to about 3,700 in El Paso. You get the high point, 8,700 up in Guadalupe, Mount Livermore and Davis Mountains, Emery Peak down in the Chizo. So, and generally speaking, we're about 4,500 here in Alpine. When you get up to the like the Caldwell Ranch or the Madera Canyon Trail, that's going to be around 5,500, I believe. Another thing that's with this elevation that also gives us difference in aspect. So the north-facing slopes are generally going to be a little bit cooler, a little bit wetter. As you can see, this is Pine Canyon looking east. So there on your right is the highly vegetated sort of north-facing slope. And then the other slope over there on the left is that south-facing. You can see the differences. That south-facing is going to be a lot hotter, drier, more arid. That's where you can see things like more sotols versus that north-facing slope where you see more pines, junipers, and of course, as you get higher in elevation or deeper in those canyons, it gets cooler and wetter. You'll see more oaks, other pine trees, orchids, ferns, stuff like that. The dominant two forms of geology we have out here are limestone. So basically from Del Rio all the way to sort of mid-Brewster County, following the river up. Basically, all of that's limestone. There are some pockets of igneous. Then, of course, you have like Santa Elena Canyon, the Guadalupes, the Sierra Diablos, all of that's limestone. Most of the other stuff is going to be igneous, but we do have other types of geology out here, spotty. And without going into all the different soils, that's a soil map for West Texas. So all of those things sort of come together and sort of dictate what sort of flora we have. So elevation, geology, soil type, rainfall, and some plants are very specific to certain parts of or certain types of soil. Others are very much generalists. Just wanted to throw this up. These are some botanists. You've probably seen their names in various publications, or you've seen their names applied to plants. The one that I want to point out here is this person here. That is Mary Sophie Young. There's only like 2 or 3 photos of her. She died pretty young. I believe she had cancer. She was working at UT, used to come out here. And that's the Styrax that we hiked to yesterday. It was lost for about 100 years until one of our members over there found it about 7 years ago or so. And we've been slowly sort of going back, trying to, one, collect seed or get cuttings on. And we finally made it back yesterday. It was a pretty long hike. To collect a few seeds, a total of 4. So hopefully we can get that growing and get it to some botanic gardens. I'm sure most of y'all know Barton Warnock, heard his name. He's a local guy, been here for years and years and years. We do have all 3 copies of his book in the silent auction. So they're still pretty useful. I kind of like to have them on my bookshelf. And of course, I'm sure we all know Dr. Powell, with his recent book of the flowering plants of the Trans-Pecos. He also has another number of other books that he's published out here. And of course, we should also mention Dr. Worthington out of Utah. He helped out with the Trans-Pecos book, and he's also been collecting mainly in the El Paso, sort of southern New Mexico area. And who knows what Chihuahua means? I did not know this until 2 days ago. Patty? All right, so perhaps it meant the dry place. I found lots of references, but another name that popped up was a place where the waters meet, and the thought is that's where the Rio Conchos. This is in Mexico, just a few miles outside of Ojinaga. This is the river that actually feeds into the Rio Grande. So, speaking of the Rio Grande, if you want to see what it looks like in El Paso, anybody know why it looks like this in El Paso? Or lots of mumbling. Yeah, agriculture. Well, and there's the big dam, the series of dams, but it is dry most of the year in El Paso. But it is a raging river slash ditch in Candelaria. And most of this water is coming through Capote Creek and feeding into the river at that point. But good news, as you get down further you actually have a nice river. I'm sure all y'all heard the reports of the Santa Elena going dry this year. Apparently it was the first time in anyone's memory that it had done that. So we do have some water issues to deal with. As far as the plants go, there's not a whole lot of difference between what you're seeing in El Paso and as you sort of make your way down through. Most of them are invasives, as you can imagine. By far the biggest one is Rundo Donuts, right here on the right. But we also have, interesting enough, the Nicotiana, that yellow flower guy over there, which strangely enough, even though it's not native, one of the native parasitic Orobonches, Riparia, that's its host plant. So, so mostly invasives down there, but people are working on clearing that up. And what's feeding the Rio are often these little tributaries. This one is in Presidio County. So after a big, nice rain, we'll have a big flush of mainly annuals, especially at lower elevation. So a few of those we're going to point out. By far, one of my favorites is that Proboscidea, that yellow flowered one over there. It's an interesting group of plants. I've always loved them, and finding them out in the wild is always fun. Interesting one about the Hopkins blue pollen. Further upstream, you'll find more woodies, definitely your cottonwoods, your willows, and the tornillo, the Prosopis pubescens. Moving up in elevation, we're about 3,000 foot, 2,000 to 3,000 feet. These are limestone canyons or limestone habitats with low elevation. Mostly low scrub, although you can get some higher or taller trees, maybe reaching about 20 feet, some of the deeper canyons. Lots of wildflowers down there. And apparently, right now is the time to be down there. They've had so much rain. It's what I've heard. It's just busting with flowers. I wanted to go down the Black Gap the other day, but instead decided to stay and write the presentation. So we do have some plants that are generally just found on limestone. The Candelia is dominant on, or mainly found on limestone, although there are a few populations we found on igneous. The Hectea, that's another limestone lover. There's this little senna that's found down there. That salvia, I wanted to throw that in there because that is more of a South Texas species, but it tends to follow the river up. And so we have a few species that are more commonly the thorn scrub you can actually find down in Brewster County, especially along the rivers where it's a little bit more protected. A little bit higher limestone elevation. We were just out there a few weeks ago with the iOS tour. Went back, it was so beautiful. This is McKittrick Canyon, high elevation, running water, fish swimming around, absolutely beautiful. Coming across things like the lobelia, the Physostegia, who knew that we had an obedient plant out here in West Texas. Of course, a handful of species of columbines, they're currently in full bloom there. And luckily enough, we found this little rock daisy in bloom as well. Some of the trees and shrubs that you'll see up there, generally what you would expect, the big tooth maple, some ash, black cherry, and of course the chinkapin oaks are found in pockets out here the further west you go. It seems like those leaves get more and more narrow, and I think that's one of the ones that the Andrew Hip and Morton Arboretum we're looking at to see if there's actually a difference. By far, one of the most common plants or plant types you'll find out here is from these creosote basins. So we are sort of this basin range. You have your high points, your high elevation that dips down. You have these long stretches of basically, as Dan Osage would call it, stinking desert. And then it comes back up. But creosote is definitely dominant out there. We do have some other interesting plants that you'll see. The ocotillo I mentioned earlier. The mimosa, which whenever that does flush out, it's really quite beautiful. A nema, about the size of a silver dollar. That whole plant is only about 2 inches in diameter. And that calstromia is an annual species that often pops up after our monsoon rains. This was taken a few years ago, Lake Guadalupe, or I don't even know if it has a Salt Lake is the name of it, but this is these are the salt flats next to the Guadalupe Mountains, and every once in a while, so twice now that I've been out here for about 15 years, it's flooded and it forms these little lakes. Low diversity in plants, mainly halophytes. That Alleropia is probably the most dominant shrub you'll see out there. I say that, but it's like there's, as you can see, there's nothing out there handful of other plants that are highly adapted to the saline soils. And we're getting into some more wetlands. I've been working with Casey Williams lately. He's an aquatic ecologist. Some of y'all might know his name. If you don't, I highly recommend you get him to your chapter to give a talk on the aquatics of Texas. We've been redocumenting and recollecting plants out here, aquatic plants. He's been doing DNA work to sort of develop or verify some of the species that were collected many years ago. And every once in a while, we come across something really interesting like this, which is outside of Lake Balmorhea. It is a true sort of wetland. You start walking out there and you start to sink in the waters, mainly sedges, rushes, and a few grasses, but you do find a few wildflowers sort of mixed in. I'm sure everyone knows the bluebells, but you probably don't know the Flora florifolia. Anybody know what that means? Hayden, Flora, anyone? Jeff Bennett, Flora, Patty. Yeah, what does that mean? Chlorofolia? What does chlorofolia mean? Put all that together, it's the yellow flower plant with green leaves. So anytime anyone asks you what is that yellow flower plant with green leaves, now you have an answer. So some other interesting habitats. This is down at Agua Fria. There's some rare plants down there. Everyone follows Joey Santori's YouTube. He often goes down there. I was down there with him a couple years ago and did some filming. But this is the Fizzle Flat Formation. It's really interesting. So as you walk on it, it feels like you're walking on what sort of broken dinner plates. Very, very low diversity, hardly really anything out there. There are lots of nictadges that tend to occupy chip soils, I should say. They seem to be adapted to that. But we do have other species down there. That Oregonian Vardia, I have no idea how old that thing is. It's probably about the size of a volleyball. It's got a huge, one of them had washed out. It's a really deep root system for storage. Of course, the cat's eye, the Cryptantha, that Annuocaulus, and that Xylorhiza, all of those are gypsophiles found down there. Some dunes, these are mainly around the Monahans area. Again, sand lovers, you imagine they don't tend to hold water too much, so they'll have like really deep root systems. Some of these are annuals, others are perennials, but that's mainly the eastern, sort of that northeastern dune system that we have. You don't really see these plants over in the dune system closer to El Paso. All right, grasslands. As you expect, as you're sort of driving around, you've probably seen some of that out here. It looks really good right now. If you were here 3 months ago, like this place is awful. They are basically all heavily grazed. There's really not any good grassland left. They tend to sort of rebound really quickly. You look out there, lots of green, but as you start to walk around, you realize most of those are annuals. We do have some pockets of some good stuff. By far, like the blue grama, one of the most common plants out here, or grasses out here. The mirabilis, the one on the left over there, that one's always a treat to see. Patty Manning, I think, grows. I've got one in my yard that she grew a long time ago. And we're back to, this is Juniper Canyon now. Mid elevation, I'm not sure if you can make that out. That is Boot Canyon off in the distance. Juniper kind of feeds down in here. This elevation, shrubs, as you get into some of those deeper canyons that I mentioned earlier, especially in the shaded areas, you'll start to see more trees. I'm not sure if you can see this. This is a line of trees coming down through here, mostly oaks coming out of Boot Canyon. Those taller areas tend to follow, taller plants tend to follow the drainages. But some of the really cool other plants you can find out there when you start looking around the Echeveria, widespread throughout the Tri-County area. It's kind of a limestone and igneous, but generally sort of protected areas, rocky outcrops, shady, next to boulders, things like that. Mimosa, we just missed the blooms on that mimosa. Anisacanthus, that's our desert honeysuckle. We have 3 species in Texas, not just the quadriphytus. And of course, the Aristolochians out there every once in a while. Back to Casey Williams. This is on the 06 ranch about a month or so ago. He's new, sort of a new sort of habitat for me, and a lot of it's just been working with Casey. And you'll be out on a property early in the year, dry as a bone. Once the monsoons hit, give it about, especially if the sun comes out, give it about 2 weeks to a month, and the plants just start coming out. So aquatics, who would have thought here in West Texas? And I'm sure Casey, since he's not here today, I'll just say everything he's going to say tomorrow. The heteranthera, I spent years and years and years looking for that guy. Last year, I think probably found like 10 populations of it in different tanks throughout the 06 and other places. Several species of Photomagene, Bacopa. I think we found one population 2 years ago. I think this year we've already found 5. That's Sagittaria, a lot more common than I thought it was. A few other species that you'll see out here. We'll see this on the Madera Canyon hike, that Marcellia. Those 2 Stuckinias, those are more moving water, so those are photographed up by Bell Murray. And of course, Limna, the duckweeds, you find them just about anywhere. All right, high elevation, oak, juniper, pine. Anyone that's going to go up there, you'll probably notice there's been some fire damage lately. That has responded very quickly, but there has been some recruitment by some. I've been noticing some of the pine trees coming back. Salvia rosanica, by far one of my favorite little succulents. That Palladia, it's only known from the Chizos Mountains here in the United States. That took about 5 years to finally catch that guy in flower. A few other ones. This little guy, the parasitic plant. It's only known from the Guadalupe Mountains here in Texas, although this is photographed in New Mexico. A couple other interesting ones. I think Patty was probably on the same trip, although we were in the same car. That Macromeria viridifolia, been reported out here. I've never seen it. Again, photographed in New Mexico. And of course, the Bouvardia is currently in full bloom right now. Ferns, you go through these pretty quickly, I think. Although I think we have a ton. The fern diversity. I went to a presentation or a conference a long time ago with IPSOT. There was someone that gave a presentation on the diversity of ferns in the West Texas. We have about 80 taxa out here. I don't know how many species of Selaginella, say maybe 8 total, maybe a little bit more. But we do have a high diversity of ferns. By far, probably the most iconic is the Selaginella lepidophylla, the resurrection fern. As you start looking around, you start finding all these other ones just kind of spread throughout West Texas. Apocinaceae, no longer the Slepidaceae, milkweeds, Slepids nummularia, strange milkweed that blooms in February, late February, March, maybe into April, which is really strange because we don't really have a whole lot of things coming through at that time. We still have snow that way at times. Funastrum torii, small climbing vines up in the Chizos Mountains in adjacent Mexico. The dogbane, that guy. That one was actually photographed in New Mexico too, but it's up in the Chizos Mountains. And of course, a handful of species of Athelias. Asteraceae, big family. We've got a lot out here. I think about 400 taxa total. Variable family, as you probably all are aware of that. Some of these really respond after the rains. That Nicoletti was filmed or photographed a few years ago in March. And that was after a good winter soaking that we had. Burkelia, high elevation, that Townsenia, which is pretty widespread throughout Texas and then elsewhere. Very rare out here. Cactaceae, I think we have about 100 taxa, I believe. We do have a few populations of peyote. That is peyote there, the Flora. Handful of other species. Queen of the Night, one of our rare plants. Dinoceras vivicii, all went down on the vaculite. I think the population that was along the roadside is now gone. Thanks. Fabiaceae, I think we have about 200 taxa. By far, one of the most iconic ones is the Big Bend bluebonnet. Interesting story about that. I'll keep bringing up Patty's name. We were on a survey and we were looking around and started noticing the fact that there were bluebonnets in an area that are these the ones we think they are, and why haven't they been reported here? So the first record I found of bluebonnets of RDI was in 1919 in Big Bend National Park, or along the Rio somewhere in Brewster County. And as we're doing these surveys going downstream from Big Bend all the way down to the Lajitas, these riparian surveys, we get out, we hike up on sort of the Liberty Flats or the limestone up there. We started noticing all these bluebonnets. We didn't think, well, surely this hadn't been reported. And so, and it was right after my book had come out. I'm sure I did some research. And I did not find any records of this plant in Terrell or Valverde counties. And so, such an iconic plant. I ended up going back and making some collections at a gentleman's property that I met. I was canoeing down the road, or canoeing down the river, and he had absolute thousands and tens of thousands of them. So it just kind of goes to show you that even very common plants, very iconic plants, can go unrecorded for so long. And that was 100 years before it got recorded in Terrell or Valverde counties. So the oaks, they've been in the news lately. We've got about 26 taxa out here. Some of them are fairly common, some are pretty rare. This is sort of a list of some of the rare ones, except for the Gravesy eye down there in the bottom middle. Hinkley oak, just a few populations known in sort of really, really rough limestone down in South Presidio County. And then I don't think they're in Brewster. Did they make it across I don't think they make it across into Brewster County. Interesting thing about them, they're little small scrub oaks, but if you ever seen the ones at San Antonio Botanic Garden, they form in the small trees to about 20 foot tall. We have a handful there, and I think there's probably some around here in Alpine as well. And a few unknown oaks. These are some of the ones we've been working on, the ones that sort of popped up in the news lately. Potentially tardifolia. We're still not 100% sure if that's a true species. Somebody else much smarter than me will tell us that. We did find something that looked like cider rockfilla up in the Chiefs as well, at the bottom middle. This is an unknown white oak that we went and collected. It had been recorded as, I believe, sinuata. I was out there with Adam Black about a month ago, and he's definitely says it's not sinuata, but we have no idea what it is. And of course, we're finding lots of things that look like chihuahuensis in some of the areas in the Davis Mountains. Orchids. Yep, we have a few of them out here. Most of them are the microheterotrophs, or I think they used to be called saprophytic orchids. They sort of use the fungus and the root system of other plants around them to survive. This guy right here, Wanaki eye, that was photographed on the 06 ramp. This is Toa. One of, I think, two known populations or two known plants in the Chisos Mountains, Big Bend, so the high elevation stuff. Oddly enough, I believe both populations or both plants are known within like 4 feet of a trail, which is really remarkable that they built that trail right next to those rare plants. So it just goes to show you that we need to be out more off trail in some of those places, because I'm sure that there's more of these plants. It's pretty rugged out, as you can imagine. And of course, the Malaxis and the Dichromanthus cymborinus, which is basically, I wouldn't say it's common, but there is definitely some plants there in Big Bend National Park that are very well known. One of them is about a foot off the trail. And we have a few rarities and oddities. Patty Manning, I think, was with me, bringing her name up. When we found the pneumonia, is another good story. We found the one plant, I think we spent about 30 minutes photographing one plant before we hiked up a saddle and back down the other side, about 10,000. So that's that population. I'd gone back a few times to get it full flower, but it was all over the slope. It's pretty amazing. Emeria suaveolens, which I think has now changed names. It's known from one location in Black Gap, sort of low limestone. That little borage, lower limestone, it's always fun to see. It's usually a winter bloomer. And of course, that's that styrax we collected yesterday. And then that Bates malveum, that's just known in the window trail, lower window trail, and then below the window coral. So that went much faster than I thought it was going to, mainly because I don't take questions. But I'd like to thank all those folks, private landowners have given us access over the years, and definitely the different organizations that we've worked. And I am open to questions. So I was working with, it was funded by U.S. Botanic Garden. Most all the DNA work and the logistics were handled by Morton Arboretum, but we had Bartlett, San Antonio, Sol Ross, I'm not gonna remember, UC Davis, Nature Serve. There's 10 of us were out there, 9 of us were out there looking for what was presumed to be extinct. The last known plant disappeared sometime around 2011. So this is part of a larger project that we've been working on, which is sort of its species delineation to figure out what is going on with the oaks out here, because they're so bizarre, they're not very stable. In the past, I would just walk by them and say that's mostly, Grisea or mostly Gravesii, and didn't really pay much attention to them. But after spending some time out in the field with these folks, you can really start to pick up the trending characteristics that you're seeing in those. But they wanted to say essentially, is Gracilliformis a true species, or is it just a thin-leaf Gravesii? So we're going out collecting DNA material for Morton to analyze and process. And in part of that, we had talked about making an expedition to come out and see if we could find Tridifolia, because it had not been seen since 2011. So it's presumed extinct. And at that point, there was only one known tree. And so we decided just to put together a crew of people. We didn't just like decide that. We put together a crew of people, went down there and sort of systematically hiked the areas that we thought would be promising. And we ended up finding a very large tree. It's not in very good health. And so we documented that one. There was a smaller tree that we found that the characters match, but since it is so small, quite often those characters don't stay all the way through maturity. And then that one that I showed you, the Sideroxyla, that was sort of the best match. It had the underside of the leaves are very, very white, very fuzzy, very pubescent. Nothing at all matches that in the Chisos Mountains. We have Quercus hypolipoides, which is found in the Davis Mountains, which has that the underside of the leaves are very white and pubescent. But of course, that's pretty far away. And of course, you have some plants in Mexico that Sideroxyla sort of match that. So, and we've been finding other interesting things the more and more that we get out. Yes. The question is, how long does it take to use the common name or the botanical name? For me, it's kind of whatever I use first, and whatever I'm comfortable with. Sometimes if I see a name and like there's no way I'm going to be able to pronounce that, I'll just use the common name. So that's my answer. Any other questions? With climate change, what plant communities are going to be most affected out here? All of them. So, and it's not just climate change, it's other things that are happening, but by far sort of the higher elevation, the more sensitive plants that are found at these cooler, higher elevation temperatures or higher elevation, cooler temperatures, they're already at the extent of where they could be. They can't go any lower. And if there's no place higher to go, then they don't have much luck. So most of those are going to be the ones that are going to suffer the most. More questions? I thought I saw some hands up. Yes. What are the threats from the human-made? That's a pretty deep question. So these areas have been impacted since, they've been impacted since any humans have been here, but really since the Spanish came and they started with bringing in cattle and sheep and whatever else they're gonna just sort of run around and occupy areas. And of course, the grazing over the years has had a huge impact. You can still see remnants of that even in the high Chizos, probably about 20 feet from where we found the tardifolia, there was an old fence line. And you can get back into some of these deep canyons and you think, wow, I'm in a really pristine, nice area and there's trash on the ground. And I'm not talking about, well, there's definitely plastic trash, but there's also old trash, which now is historic, I guess. You don't touch it, but it's still trash. There's fence lines that are still up in the Chizos Mountains that you think, well, why wouldn't they go through and take these out? It seems like that would be a smart thing to do because for the wildlife. Water issues, is not just Central Texas that's suffering right now. I mean, even though things look very green out here, we are still suffering. Like I said, Santa Elena went dry. Casey can probably talk more about this. We've had long conversations about, and I'll just be frank, those idiots that go and buy 20 acres of land and put in a well in Central Texas and then put in 10 acres of Bermuda grass to feed their one longhorn so they can be a gentleman rancher. And they wonder why their springs are going dry. And you multiply that by 1,000 and all of a sudden, like those aquifers are not sustainable. And the same thing is happening out. So. Oh yeah. Keep forgetting to do that. We had some more questions, I think. Yeah.
West Texas landowner.
I got a question in the back.
Yeah.
Are the people in West Texas recognizing the effects of climate change in this region? I'm not sure if I can answer that question. I don't know what they would. I mean, I can tell you that weather is cyclical, but I've seen populations out here die off. So of plants, and whether that's through poaching or just general something happening and they're just not coming back. Yes.
Is that what grass is out? Is that the license?
So the question is coming outside of Marathon, you can definitely see there's different types of vegetation. You have sort of grassland, and then you have some woody vegetation, and quite often some of that woody vegetation might be cactus. And I'm assuming you're referring to the choyo. So when you see large populations of choyo, the cylindropunchias, or even mesquite, you probably saw some of this, and you can even see like there could be a fence line where those cactus stop, or the whatever it may be stops. That's an indication of overgrazing. Not knowing exactly where you were, where the pronghorn was with the grassland. There are some well-managed grasslands up there. There's a prairie dog towns that could have been in that general area. By far, I would say the most common, and somebody can easily correct me if I'm wrong, the most common grass that I typically see out here is the blue gum. But you'll have patches that other plants will be, or other grasses will be the dominant species. Ricky, do you have a question?
West Texas is pretty well known for being private. Lock gates, how hard is it to get access to some of the work y'all do?
How hard is it to get access to private land out here? It just depends on the landowner. I think the ones that will be open to people coming out are, you're not going to have an issue, but then the ones that are a little bit more insular, you're never going to get in. So there's properties out here that I'm pretty sure that I will never gain access to. And on that topic, who here uses iNaturalist? I'm not going to raise my hand because I don't use it. You want to know why? People are now using that to trespass. Someone was photographing some plants out here recently. They posted a photo of them photographing a plant. They even named the name of the plant that was being photographed. I knew who they were. I've never been able to get access to. So I asked them how or who they were with. And they went off on something about, the land never really belonged to anyone, and it's part of the muscular Apache. It's like, well, how is it that you're trespassing is helping you know, the native peoples here, you know, you're just really doing this for selfish reasons. And yeah, they were trespassing, and it's all about, you know, photographing that next species or documenting that plant that's already been documented numerous times. So the question now is, were you just trespassing, or were you just photographing? Were you like collecting seed, or were you digging up plants? You know, we don't know. So if you're willing to do that, then what else are you willing to do? So be careful with that. I will say, the Caldwell Ranch is going on the Caldwell Ranch. Okay, were you planning on photographing plants and posting that to iNaturalist? You know, did you ask permission of the landowner? Are they okay with it? There's all these things you have to ask. I think people assume because they're somewhere and they can take a photo and put it on the web with location data that that's an okay thing to do, and it's really not. We are definitely, people are using that database and other databases to poach species. Hope that answered your question. Yes. Yeah, we still have time. Poaching. The question is, can I speak about poaching a little bit? There's been lots of articles coming out lately about poaching. Sul Ross State University, their greenhouses, they obtain species that are confiscated at the border. Most of those are coming out of Mexico. They end up in a greenhouse for a while. A lot of those are going to die, and then we have to find, or Karen has to find, homes for these plants. And quite often we try to distribute those to botanic gardens. You can't really put them back out in the wild because you don't know where they're from. I would love to have a number for you and say, you know, X number of species are removed, but we have no idea. I just had done a few interviews with various news or media outlets, and I think there are different levels of poaching. You have your general person that's out here on vacation and they want a reminder of, you know, their time in Big Bend, so they're going to pop out a little cactus from the side of the road. No one's ever going to notice that. There's 500,000 visitors to Big Bend Park annually now. So even if a small percentage of them did that, you're going to lose a lot of your cactus. Then you have the ones that are actively out, illegally sort of digging up plants on private land without permission, or going into state or federal property, state or federal public property, digging up plants and selling those. Then you have the ones that the legal poaching, or it's not ethical. It's still illegal. I wouldn't say it's ethical. They're the ones that are using their land to go in and harvest. So that's completely fine here in the state of Texas. You can do that. Do I agree with it? No, I do not like that. So we're going to get into the illegal side of that now. So where are all these plants going that are dug up and sold? If you can still look on eBay, Facebook Marketplace, whatever. There are people out here making more money than I make. I mean, they're making $5,000 to $10,000 a month digging up plants and selling them online. Some of the really large areocarpus are going into the hundreds of dollars or into the low thousands online. And most of those, I would say most, some of those are being sold overseas to various other countries. So it's a huge thing. And once, as Hoban Riley, who'll be here tomorrow, said, once it's gone, it's gone. It ain't coming back. And once you start to decrease these populations, and say you have a population of 100, over time, if you get down to 30, is there enough seed recruitment later on to replenish that? Or is it just going to slowly die out? And as people just begin to take more and more and more. So, yes. Sure, why not? I think it's silly. What is sustainability? I would like to know, what are they doing? How many plants are they planting in lieu of what they're taking out? Yeah, so how is that sustainable? I like the one where they're creating grassland by removing sotol. So,
Catch Michael with the break. Got any more questions? Give Michael a hand.
thank you.